everyone, today I'm going to show you a stretching and rolling routine to relieve tight muscles in your hips. All you're going to need is a lacrosse ball. I do have a few other things that I like to use. Lacrosse ball is usually good enough, but you could use a foam roller like this for some of the other trigger points. These are pretty good for bigger areas like on the legs. And you can use a recovery ball. You can get these balls anywhere where they carry like sports equipment. They typically tend to have stuff at this in the yoga section. So this is called a recovery ball. It's just a slightly bigger ball that's as hard as a lacrosse ball. And the other thing I have, because we will be doing some stretches, I have a few foam bricks just in case I need them for support. So I'm going to get started right away. So the first points that we're going to hit are the tensor fasciae latae. So on the side and the front of the hip here, you'll see two dark dots, and those are the trigger points. And then we're also going to hit the sartorius. The sartorius is the longest muscle in the body. It goes from the hip down and attaches to the inside of the knee. So it affects both those joints, the knee and the hip. So we're going to get in there. So let's grab our foam roller and our lacrosse ball and get started. Point I'm hitting is the TFL. I'm going to be using a lacrosse ball. To find our TFL, we locate our hip bone, and we're going to move 2 fingers down, and then we're going to hit the side one first. So we're going to go about 2 fingers over. You're going to find a very tender spot, and that's where you want to be. So I'm going to do it on the floor like this, and I'm just going to roll back and forth, putting pressure only going in one direction, like I'm pushing toothpaste out of a tube, for 8 to 12 strokes. Nice and slow. It shouldn't be too painful, so you don't want to put so much pressure that it's excruciating, but probably slight discomfort. And then I'm going to come off of it and move to the front point on this muscle. So again, I find the hip bone. And this one, since I'm going to the front point, I'm just going to move about 2 fingers down, and that's going to be my point. So 8 to 12 more, only going in one direction. Like I said, some people might find it easier to hit this point with a larger ball. As long as it's hard enough and it doesn't give too much, it works perfectly. And a foam roller like this also works really well for those points. The next point I'm going to show you is the sartorius. There are actually 4 or 5 points along this that tend to happen. The muscle goes like this, and it attaches at the back of your leg. So we're going to want to use something a little bit bigger. I'm using this. You can also use a rolling pin. If you have a rolling pin, you can just roll down your leg. That works really well too. I'm going to turn my leg out like that and work my way up from the top point and do little sections at a time and go all the way down, 1 point at a time, doing 8 to 12 little strokes, pushing in one direction until I get to all the way to the one down here. So I'm going to follow it along all the way and do little points all the way along. All right, so since we've done that section, we're going to stretch a little bit. So I'm going to do a stretch that's going to stretch the outside of my hips and one that's going to stretch the inside of my groin area. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the one for the outside here. I'm going to make a wide diamond shape with my legs. Sit as upright as possible and think belly button towards your heels. I'm going to grab my ankles and use my forearms to push my knees towards the floor. So if I'm doing it correctly, I'm going to feel a stretch on the outside of my hip here. And I'm going to hold that for 5 to 10 deep breaths, keeping my back relatively straight. Then I'm going to increase or move my legs in so I can get the stretch in here, or increase the stretch in here. And I'm going to do the same thing. Think belly button towards the heels and use your forearms to push your knees down. Hold that for 5 to 10 deep breaths. Okay, once you've done that, shake out your legs and we're gonna move to our next set of trigger points. All right, so the next points that we're going to hit are the hip flexor. So in this diagram, you can see actually the hip flexor or the psoas and the iliacus. I'm going to show you how to do both. However, many people may not want to do the iliacus because it's quite uncomfortable. And the other point that I'm going to show you is called the quadratus lumborum. It's a muscle that sits right on the outside of the hip flexor. And let's say you have one leg longer than the other. This is often the muscle that causes that problem because it pulls one side of your pelvis up. So I'm going to show you these. Let's grab the ball and go. So to hit the hip flexor, I'm going to use this lacrosse ball and this foam brick to kind of prop it up for myself. You could also use just a recovery ball. This will work pretty easily and you shouldn't have to prop it up. So to find the hip flexor, I'm going to find my hip bone, the top of it, and then my belly button, and then I'm going to find a point halfway between. Then I'm going to place the ball there and put it on top of the brick. And I'm just going to do very small strokes for 8 to 12 reps. And again, only pressure in one direction. So that's how I'm going to do the hip flexor, and of course you're going to repeat it for both sides. Now the iliacus, I did talk to you about that. So our hip bones, we have a space here where you can kind of dig your fingers in if you're really, really lean. If you're laying down, it's easier to do. And you can take your fingers of one hand and push up inside there against the bone. So don't push into your stomach, that's not a good thing to do. Push against the bone and release. So just press and release. Don't rub back and forth, just press and release. And that's how we release the hip flexor, or sorry, the iliacus, which is one of the hip flexor muscles. All right, now I'm going to get into the quadratus lumborum. So that muscle is actually very, very deep inside the body. It shows in the diagram as if it's on the back, but we actually get it from the side of your body. So you have two options here. The first option is if you're laying down, you can use your fingers and between your last rib and the top of your hip bone, there's a space. So you're going to put your fingers in that space and you're going to hit a wall of muscle. I usually only use 2 fingers, and then you do a scoop motion going downwards for 10 to 12 strokes, and then one going upwards for 10 to 12 strokes. The other way is if you were to lay on your side and use a ball. So you could use something like this, but it needs to be small enough that you're not pushing on your bottom rib because you can really injure yourself that way. So something small also works. And I also have something called a theracane. Like this. That does the same thing. So it goes into the side and I can push down or up. This fancy tool is $40 on Amazon. It's called a theracane. So I can use that and go downwards and up, or I could, again, elevate a ball, make sure I get the right point, and go back and forth, very small strokes in there. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to stretch it out. So we're going to sit up. You can either sit like this or with one leg bent. If you're sitting with one leg bent, it's because you're not as flexible. So we're going to reach, keep this on side nice and long. We're going to reach over your head and keep your bum cheek on this side planted to the floor. Then you're gonna feel it stretch up here, and you're gonna hold for 5 to 10 deep breaths. Then the other side. Then we're going to do a stretch for the inside here, and all you're going to do is keep your toes pointing towards the ceiling, then keep your spine long and walk your hands forward. So you're gonna probably feel that all the way up, but mostly in here. Okay, and lastly I'm going to show you how to roll a few points in the glutes to release the hips from the other side, and then a few stretches and we'll be done. I'm going to be showing you how to roll a few points on the glutes that will help release. So we're going to start at this top line here. So these are glute medius trigger points. They're mostly on the side. So you can see the dark dot, that's what we're going to hit. And then we're going to do the glute minimus, which is a bit lower down. And you can see that there are a few different points. And the last point we're going to hit is the piriformis. So the piriformis, this little muscle, is the muscle that often causes sciatica. The sciatic nerve in many people either pass right through it or right beneath it. So if this muscle becomes tight, it pushes down on the sciatic nerve and causes sciatic pain. Alright, so let's grab our foam roller or our lacrosse ball and get started. So I'm going to demonstrate using the foam roller because it's a little bit easier to demonstrate, but again, you can use a recovery ball or lacrosse ball to hit any of these points. The first point that we're going to hit is going to be the glute medius. We're going to hit kind of the glute minimus and medius together. So we're going to start up here and we're going to work our way down. So kind of side, but more towards the outside of the glute. Still on it. I'm going to place myself with the bottom leg bent on the foam roller, and I'm going to roll slightly back and forth. Notice how I lean back a little bit. This is so I can make sure I'm on the glute part. If I want to make it less intense, I could straighten my leg. When I bend my knee here, it tends to flush out the muscle and make it a little bit easier to target. So, like the other trigger points, 8 to 12 per section. Then I'm going to move down, and this time I'm going to keep my knee bent and go a little bit more to the lower part and on the side. So again, 8 to 12. You'll know if you're hitting the points because they'll be very tender. So you want to control the pressure so that it's not so painful that you end up bruising or that it's just unbearable. It should be slightly discomforting. Pressure going in one direction, like I'm pushing toothpaste out of a tube. I'm going to show you one final one, which is the piriformis. So the piriformis is located basically right in the center of your bum cheek. It's easy to get with one of these if you cross your leg, but I'm going to show you where it is on me. So it goes from your hip and goes like that. So to get it, I'm going to be aiming to get the one on my left. So I'm going to cross my left leg over and lean to the side. Then I'm going to be able to go over that muscle. It's really quite a bit lower down and more towards the middle of the glute muscle. And again, 8 to 12 small little strokes that are nice and slow. Okay, so once I've done that, I am going to stretch out the muscle. So I have a few glute stretches that I like to do. This one here where I cross the leg over. Another option would be to keep this leg straight and cross it over and hug it. So you feel the stretch in the bent leg. And if this is too hard, you could also do it laying down like this. where you pull the leg in. It's the same thing. And then we're going to do a half frog stretch. So one leg is bent, one is straight, and my heel points to the ceiling. So I really get a good stretch in here. And do both sides. And a scorpion stretch. Pull one knee in, and then to the side, but I keep my hip on the floor. So I'm really just working against my own resistance here. Then I switch sides, one knee in, and keep the hip on the floor. Just work against your own resistance. So I hope that helps you, and you have nice loose hips after today's session. Have a great day.